Dizzy the Dragonfly had always been a dreamer. While other dragonflies flitted between lily pads and played hide-and-seek among tall reeds, Dizzy spent his days envisioning a brighter, bigger life. It wasn't that he didn't enjoy the gentle hum of summer by the pond. It was the fact his wings itched for something more. He wanted to mix, blend, create, and serve. He wanted to be the mayor of his own little business empire, even if he was only 3 centimeters tall. And so, on the day he finally decided to follow his dream, Dizzy packed up his favorite kale leaves, a puny blender made out of plastic bottle caps and old watch parts, and headed out toward a place he'd only heard about from passing geese, the big city. He never expected to be so overwhelmed. The instant he arrived, the sheer noise of the traffic nearly flipped him backward. The wind created by the speeding cars almost knocked him out of the sky. He soared 3 loops in midair, trying not to crash into a bus. But Dizzy persevered, clinging to the dream that had warmed his wings all through the transitional breezes of spring. He'd spent countless nights whisper-mumbling about the fruit concoctions that would someday bring smiles to passers-by. Smoothies! That was the plan. Tiny, delicious smoothies, served in teensy cups the size of a human fingertip. Sure, most humans probably wouldn't even notice him, but he hoped that enough curious folks would stop long enough to pay a few shiny coins and sip a pineapple-banana blend. Navigating the city wasn't as straightforward as he'd hoped. Dizzy found that street signs were about as tall as skyscrapers from his perspective, forcing him to circle lampposts until his wings got tired, scanning for any sign of a place to set up shop. Every intersection seemed noisier than the last. Drivers shouted at each other in a rhythmic chaos of honks, squealing tires, and frustrated conversation. Pedestrians stomping back and forth paid little attention to a single dragonfly buzzing overhead. That is, until one unsuspecting jogger almost swallowed him. Dizzy nearly escaped that scenario by doing an emergency barrel roll. Catching his breath and wiping a bit of sweat from his compound eyes, Dizzy caught sight of what he deemed to be the perfect intersection. It was right at the corner of Main Street and 9th Avenue, a swirling carnival of honking cabs, hustling office workers, street carts and buskers, juggling everything from flaming torches to squeaky rubber chickens. That corner was where the city's pulse truly throbbed, and Dizzy sensed opportunity. After all, if one wanted customers, one had to go where the people were, even if those people were about 1,000 times larger than him. He set to work immediately. There was a small patch of sidewalk near a rusty newspaper vending machine, and although it was only big enough for a single human foot, it was more than enough space for a whole dragonfly enterprise. Dizzy assembled a little stand with popsicle stick pillars and a cardboard roof salvaged from a discarded cereal box. He installed the miniature blender, a piece of mechanical genius if you asked him, organized his fruit slices, cut down to microscopic sizes, and took one final look. The sign above the stand read, "Mini Smoothie Madness." He etched the letters with marker, bright enough that if anyone happened to look closely, they could read it. Truth be told, Dizzy's first few customers weren't customers. They were pigeons, big clumsy pigeons waddling about, pecking for crumbs. One particularly plump bird eyed Dizzy's stand, probably thinking it was a new kind of feeding station. In a flash, the pigeon lunged forward, knocking over Dizzy's sign and snatching half a strawberry. Dizzy squealed, frantically grabbing a wooden stir stick to fend off the feathered thief. Thankfully, the pigeon seemed unimpressed by the miniature sword and plodded away with a bored coo. Moments later, a definite potential customer strolled by, a short older man in a wrinkled suit. He paused to bend down, squinting at the curious construction next to the vending machine. "Ha!" he said, noticing the sign. "Mini Smoothie Madness?" His eyebrows rose to impossible heights when he realized whose voice answered back. "Hello, sir," chirped Dizzy, fluttering his wings in excitement. "Can I tempt you with a refreshing fruit blend? We have kale kiwi surprise, pineapple banana swirl, and strawberry lime extravaganza." The blender whirred, no louder than a mosquito's hum. The businessman blinked hard, as though expecting the entire thing to be a hallucination. "A talking dragonfly sells smoothies?" he said in disbelief. Dizzy beamed. "Yes, indeed, friend. The best mini smoothies in the city. guaranteed. He poured a droplet of pinkish liquid into a thimble-sized cup and held it out. Try a free sample? With a baffled shrug, the man placed his index finger on the sidewalk for Dizzy to load the thimble. He carefully brought it up to his mouth. The man took a minuscule sip and allowed the flavors to swirl in his mouth. Before Dizzy's eyes, the older man's stern face lifted into delight. That's delicious. Tastes like fresh garden strawberries, but with a zesty twist. How do you do that? Dizzy looked proud as he tapped the side of his little blender. Secret recipe? A pinch of dragonfly magic and plenty of love. Despite the man's wonder, the reality of the scenario soon dawned on him. Right. So how much for a full cup? Dizzy's hopeful grin wilted only slightly. Well, a full cup for you is about a gazillion times bigger than what I can make, but I can do enough that you'll taste it. He dragged out a teeny measuring spoon. 50 cents a portion, good sir. Exact change only, he squeaked. The man rummaged in his pockets, producing 2 quarters that gleamed like compact discs from Dizzy's vantage. The dragonfly nearly toppled himself trying to handle the enormous coins. Eventually, the man let them drop gently on the ground, and Dizzy kicked them behind his stand for safekeeping. The man thanked him, said he'd spread the word, and moved along. After that first sale, Dizzy was on cloud 9. He'd done it. He'd actually sold a smoothie in the big city. Now, how to attract more customers? That corner was teeming with possibilities. Tourists taking selfies, couriers speeding by on bikes, harried parents pushing strollers. Any one of them could become the next fan of mini smoothie madness. Dizzy began shouting mini advertisements in his squeaky voice. Ice-cold fruit blends, guaranteed to put the buzz in your day. He shook a tiny cocktail shaker overhead, though no one could hear him. Pedestrians who did glimpse him couldn't quite believe their eyes. Many brushed it off as some new marketing gimmick they had no time for. Still, as midday approached, a few more curious city dwellers wandered over. A trio of delivery men in matching uniforms stopped for a break, forming a circle around the miniature stand. Dizzy happily dispensed exotic blends while the men marveled at the impossibly small operation. They laid out coins, and by the end of it, Dizzy had a tidy sum building under his cardboard stand. He also had an unexpected problem. Empty fruit stock. He brought as much produce as he could carry, but customers demanded more variety. So in a whirlwind moment, Dizzy decided to shut down the stand temporarily and hunt for needed supplies. He fashioned a quick "back soon" sign taped next to a doodle of a pineapple. Then, with eager wings, off he flew. Finding fruit in the city turned out to be a comedic adventure. Dizzy buzzed into grocery stores, evading the watchful eyes of bored cashiers. He feasted his compound eyes on mountains of apples, oranges, and strawberries. Navigating the produce section was thrilling, like a labyrinth of potential smoothie ingredients. But how was a 3-centimeter dragonfly supposed to pay? He couldn't exactly unfold a wallet the size of half a postage stamp for the baffled cashier. His solution was unconventional. Dizzy discovered a mesmerizing fruit display table that was being replaced by a fresh batch. In the process, a clerk was discarding bruised bananas and strawberries that were slightly past their prime for display. They landed in a large bin, presumably headed for the trash. Dizzy felt his wings vibrate with excitement. Those bruised, battered fruits would be perfect for blending. He swooped in, carefully stuffing tiny slices into improvised leaf pouches. As long as the fruit was still good enough to be safe, he reasoned, it was fair game. His heart pounded every time the store clerk turned around, but he managed to slip out undetected, loaded with freebies. He soared triumphantly back to the intersection, proud that he'd found a workaround to keep costs low. In business terms, he was simply maximizing profit, right? Back at his stand, Dizzy resumed operations. He posted a flashy, "Now serving more flavors" sign with little hand-drawn fruit icons. Afternoon foot traffic soared. Soon he was serenading a line of curious onlookers, most bent over double to peer at him. People took videos on their phones, snapping pictures of the unbelievably small stand and its enthusiastic proprietor. Dizzy turned on the charm, doing cheerful little mid-air flips before handing over samples. Oddly enough, the biggest sales came from passers-by who kinda just wanted the novelty. Many admitted that the actual quantity of smoothie was barely enough to taste. But the important part was the experience. Soon, mini smoothie madness was trending on social media. Dizzy even got a mention from a local lifestyle blogger who wrote, "You guys have to see this for yourselves. A literal dragonfly blending smoothies. It's the cutest something new in the city. P.S. Pineapple lime is actually fantastic." Fame, however, brought bigger complications, namely, the city's official health inspector. One bright afternoon, just as Dizzy was serving a flamboyant fashion consultant a kale lime mini swirl, he noticed someone in a crisp white shirt, black pants, and shiny shoes approaching in a hurry. The inspector braced his hands on his hips, scanning the cardboard stand with suspicion. He fished out a small notepad and tapped a pen anxiously. "Is this establishment licensed?" he demanded. Dizzy blinked. "Is that an official question? Because well, I guess I don't have a license if you want to be super technical about it." The fashion consultant parted with her coin, then tiptoed away diplomatically. The health inspector narrowed his eyes. "If you're handling produce and serving it to the public, you need to operate within city guidelines. Where is your permit?" Dizzy made a nervous buzz. I'm only a dragonfly, sir. I didn't realize you needed official permission for a tiny smoothie stand." The inspector scribbled furiously, eyes scanning the dusty sidewalk. "I could cite you for multiple violations right now. Improper food storage, unapproved location, no visible business license. This is quite out of order." A pang of dread fluttered in Dizzy's chest. How could his dream end so unceremoniously? Wait, please," he said, quickly pouring a sample of his strawberry lime blend. He held it up. "Just try this. It's made with fresh fruit. I keep it hygienic. I have paper towels for any spills. Please, sir, have a taste, and maybe we can come to an understanding." The inspector paused, his expression thawing just a touch. "I suppose I can sample the product," he said, lowering himself onto one knee for a better look. Dizzy watched as the inspector carefully pinched the tiny thimble and sipped. A curious transformation came over the man. His pupils dilated and a slow grin inched across his face. That's incredible. Tangy, sweet, and is that mint?" Dizzy nodded eagerly. "Just a little pinch." The inspector straightened up, tucking his notepad away. For a moment, Dizzy dared to hope that a single taste might keep him operational, but the inspector cleared his throat loudly. "It's delicious, yes, but rules are rules, I'm afraid. We can't have an unlicensed operation here. You'll need to cease business immediately until you've gone through the proper channels. However," and here he paused, "maybe we can expedite the paperwork. I know a guy at City Hall. If you promise to keep that mint stock up, I could be persuaded to put in a good word. But you cannot operate until it's approved." Dizzy's wings drooped. "How long will that take?" "Usually a few weeks, but if I hustle, maybe a few days. Make sure you have adequate sanitation and storage. Keep the place spick and span. Then we can talk about a permanent permit." With that, the inspector gave Dizzy an awkward little salute and strode off into the crowd. Dizzy slumped behind his stand, deflated. But he wasn't about to give up. A few days he could handle. He'd simply consider this a soft opening, like a test run. He posted a sign, "Temporarily closed, reopening soon." Then he cleared up the fruit scraps, stashed away his new hoard of coins, folded the cardboard roof, and whisked it all into a hidden crevice behind the vending machine for safekeeping. No reason to drag everything home every night. That evening, Dizzy flew through the city with fresh eyes. For the first time, he was able to observe the hustle and bustle without the stress of running a business. He visited a famous bakery by hovering at the window. He soared above the heads of breakdancers performing on the sidewalk, admiring their skill. He played hide and seek with a few streetlights, dancing in their glow. And for dinner, he stopped by a community garden thriving on a small rooftop, sneaking a nibble of leftover herbs to keep his energy up. The grand city shimmered with possibilities. Early the next morning, Dizzy decided to expedite the licensing process by going straight to City Hall. Or rather, going near City Hall, since he wasn't sure how a dragonfly could file paperwork. He zigzagged through lofty corridors until he found the department that handled street vendor permits. The line was famously long, with people huffing and muttering as they inched forward. Dizzy perched on an overhead chandelier, watching the drama below. Figuring there was no chance of him being called to the service desk in a normal manner, he swooped down onto the middle of the counter. A bored clerk gasped and swatted with a file folder, nearly flattening him. Dizzy managed a frantic dodge. "Wait, I'm not a pest. I'm here to get a permit," Dizzy squeaked. "I'm the mini smoothie vendor from the intersection at Main and Ninth." The clerk had never included Dragonfly business owners in her training. She stared in disbelief, mouth agape. Meanwhile, the inspector from the previous day, who happened to be in the building, rushed over. "That's the little guy," he said, stepping in. "He's with me. Let's see if we can figure something out." It took a flurry of paperwork, nearly half a morning, and a cluster of astonished onlookers, but eventually the clerk placed a fresh city vendor license on the counter. Dizzy gazed at it with pride. Although it was too large for him to lift, the significance felt enormous. Of course, the city required official health protocols, so inspection forms were next. The inspector assured him that as long as Dizzy could demonstrate proper cleanliness, keep fruit from spoiling, and not cause a public nuisance, he'd pass. It remained to be seen how, exactly, a dragonfly would pass a facility inspection, but the inspector, having tasted the mint lime swirl, was astonishingly supportive. Finally, at the end of a chaotic day, Dizzy emerged from City Hall triumphant. The inspector scheduled a final check the following afternoon. If it went well, Dizzy could legally operate. Feeling a rush of energy, Dizzy sped back to his hidden stand with a plan to revamp, reorganize, and rebrand to make everything absolutely spotless. He spent the night polishing each popsicle stick, wiping down the blender with minuscule cotton swabs, and carefully sectioning fruit into sealed acorn caps to keep stray insects out. Stray insects, ironically enough, were mostly Dizzy's cousins or neighbors, but he knew how suspicious humans could be about any sign of extra critters in their food. That next day dawned bright and hot, perfect smoothie weather. Dizzy set up bright and early. The stand gleamed. Tiny fruit slices sat in vibrant rows. A miniature menu board spelled out the new flavors: Berry Blast, Peach Mango Delight, Kiwi Kale Kick, each available for 50 cents a sip. By midday, a small throng had gathered, awaiting the film-worthy spectacle of a city official either granting or denying the famed Dragonfly a license. A local reporter came, camera phone in hand, curious to cover the sensational story. Even a couple of street performers had gathered their props to watch the drama unfold. When the inspector arrived, he brought a certain air of seriousness. But Dizzy noticed a twinkle in the man's eye. The official performed a mock-solemn walk-around of the stand, scribbling notes. He examined Dizzy's fruit containers, gingerly tapped the cardboard countertop, and offered an approving nod at the tiny trash disposal, a peanut shell. People leaned in to hear the verdict. "All conditions appear met," the inspector said at last. "Sanitation and storage are up to standard. The vendor's license is in order, pending final taste test." He turned to Dizzy. "Shall we confirm the product is still up to the highest caliber?" Dizzy nodded with a grin. "Name your flavor," the inspector deliberated. "Let's do the Kiwi Kale Kick. I like living dangerously." Dizzy promptly scooped a tiny portion of chopped kiwi and kale into the blender, flipped the switch, and let the minuscule blades do their magic. The mixture frothed to a vibrant green. Everyone in the crowd watched like it was a sporting event final. Then Dizzy poured the concoction into the inspector's personal thimble, which the man had started carrying following day one's taste test. He lifted it to his lips, sipped carefully, and closed his eyes. Silence enveloped the crowd. Then a slow, satisfied grin spread across the inspector's face. "Delicious as ever," he proclaimed. "I hereby give this establishment full approval to operate." Applause erupted. People gathered around, each eager for a taste of the city's smallest refreshments. Phones popped out for pictures. Some posted videos of the inspector giving a thumbs up. Dizzy, wings trembling with excitement, couldn't stop smiling as he served a whirlwind of new customers, business folks on their lunch breaks, street artists, traffic cops, families who'd heard about the phenomenon on social media. The coins piled up behind the stand as 50-cent increments poured in. Dizzy beamed as the mini smoothie madness sign fluttered in the breeze. That evening, once the rush had quieted, Dizzy gazed at the city lights glowing above. Cars zoomed by, horns honked, and neon signs blazed. And yet, He felt entirely at home. He'd gone from a daydreaming dragonfly at a quiet pond to a legitimate city vendor, recognized by official channels. In the hours that followed, a group of children, who had pestered their parents to visit the famous dragonfly stand, came for a late-night treat. While they sipped their micro portions of a berry blast, Dizzy recounted his story, where he came from, why he dreamed of selling smoothies, and how he wound up in the hustle and bustle of Maine and Ninth. When the children asked how long he planned to stay in the big city, Dizzy looked thoughtful. "As long as my wings can keep me here," he said. "I'm not just here to make smoothies. I'm here to make a little bit of magic for anyone who needs something sweet in their day." A chubby toddler rummaged through his pocket and pulled out a linty nickel, offering it up with a giant grin. Dizzy accepted it graciously, as though it were a grand fortune, because from his perspective it practically was. "Thanks, kiddo," he said, turning to whip up a final mini smoothie for the night. Shadows grew long, the city's roar settling to a steady purr. Dizzy eased back on his bench behind the stand, letting exhaustion seep into his wings in the most satisfying way. Commuters trudged by for a last train home. An eccentric street performer wearing a bowler hat paused to chat, giving Dizzy a small paper heart that read, "Stay sweet, little buddy." Dizzy pinned it up on the side of his stand with a tiny piece of tape. Nighttime in the big city had its fair share of characters, too. A group of partygoers waltzed past, the bass from distant clubs thumping in the background. Some exclaimed in excitement when they spotted the stand and demanded to try a sample. One flamboyant dancer ended up giving Dizzy some glow-in-the-dark paint to decorate his sign. Down the street, a busker strummed jazzy chords on a guitar, providing a soundtrack to the drifting summer air. When Dizzy finally decided to close up shop for the day, he carefully counted his coins. A decent haul for a new vendor. He stashed the cardboard stand and the blender in his hiding spot, figuring it would be safe. The memory of all those delighted expressions warmed him from antenna to abdomen. It hadn't been easy, the pigeons, the inspector, the sheer madness of city life, but every obstacle he faced only made this moment more rewarding. On his flight to a cozy overhang where he'd found a temporary sleeping spot, Dizzy soared above the city streets. Even from a dragonfly's perspective, the lights were mesmerizing. He let out a bright little hum, a snatch of a melody he'd made up while blending fruit earlier. The city might be loud, wild, and sometimes downright dangerous for one so small, but it was also filled with wonder and excitement. Gliding through pockets of warm air and drifting through beams of neon, Dizzy promised himself he would never forget the pond that shaped him, nor the dream that led him here. He rested that night with visions of tomorrow's flavors dancing in his mind. Perhaps he'd experiment with a banana blueberry lime concoction, or maybe go tropical with mango coconut. The possibilities were infinite. The next morning, and all the mornings after that, would bring new adventures to that busy intersection. Maybe a tourist from halfway around the world looking for a quirky city memory. Maybe a hurried office worker who needed a reason, any reason, to stop and smile. Dizzy was ready to serve them all, one micro portion at a time, bridging the gap between the minuscule and the monumental with a swirl and a buzz. As he drifted off, Dizzy couldn't help but picture the blueprint for his business's future. Perhaps he'd eventually hire other tiny insects, forming a cosmic coalition of microscopic vendors. Or expand to other corners, maybe branch into coffee or pastries? The city was the limit. But for now, Dizzy felt more than content with his one little corner of madness. He was merely a speck to the average passerby, a small, winged dot with a big dream. Yet, in the swirling tapestry of city life, that speck had found his place. So, every day the throng at Main and Ninth thickened. People marveled, tasted, and told the tale of the cheerful dragonfly with the unstoppable can-do spirit, and in the swirling rush of existence it turned out that something as small as a drop of smoothie or a single dash of kale could indeed add a lot of flavor to life's grand recipe. Dizzy, perched happily behind his stand, was living proof, and if anything else came buzzing along to top his story, Dizzy was confident he'd handle it with a cheerful grin, nimble wings, and a blender full of fruity possibilities. Because in a city flooded with towering buildings and clamoring crowds, sometimes all it took to stand out was to be small, daring, and unafraid to chase a big dream.